The Artist's Toolkit, a training program for the artistic process, problems, background, and exercises.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Artist's Toolbox. Our guest today is Elizabteh Vicary. She is a British painter specializing on animals. She is kind of a secret tip. When she shows at excellent places like the Royal Summer Exhibit, for example, where she's regularly to be seen. And I can only recommend to you, if you see her name somewhere up for a show, please go and check her work, because it's a very individual, and she has a very lovely style that suggests to me something like listening with your eyes. And I'm very happy to have her here as a guest. I have always been impressed by the integrity and tenacity that I perceive in your approach to your work, Lizzie, and we have known each other for a long time. And that is why I invited you to this podcast that focuses on hang-ups in the creative work process.
Right.
Most of us know that kind of hang-up, and we experience it, and we keep experiencing it. And you could say, in a way, I'm interested in crisis and in ways and strategies that experienced colleagues like you have developed to overcome moments of creative crisis. And it's so important for beginners and students and younger artists to hear about this, because everybody runs into the same difficulties over and over and over again. And I think it's really useful to hear what strategies others have developed and what experience they have collected.
Right, Kathy, that's a really lovely opening, thank you. And I'm the person you want to talk to if you're going to talk about crisis and making mistakes and learning as well at the same time. So do you have a question, or shall I start to open up this big bag of worries and anxieties?
I mean, let's cut right to the chase.
Okay.
What was a moment or a time of crisis for you?
I think I really noticed when I left university, I really wasn't confident about my work, but I didn't really find that out until after I left. And everything I did, I was undermining myself all the time. So that's when I think it really started, and that's when I really noticed it when I left university, because I wasn't surrounded by a kind of a safety net, and university can be a safety net for you. You've got your tutors around you and your friends and your peers, and you're just learning, and it's nice and easy in a way. So, but afterwards, that was very different for me.
In what way? I mean, normally you'd think you were a professionally trained painter. You had it in writing that you were a professional painter. And, but still, what happened?
Well, just because it's in writing, of course, it doesn't mean everything. After I left, I got my studio, and that's when I started experimenting the whole time. I wasn't really focused on anything, and I kept making an awful lot of work. But every time I made the work, I always looked at it and thought, well, this isn't good enough. You've got to do better. This idea doesn't really represent you. Or I over-experimented, you could say. I looked at too much material. I used too many different types of paints. I worked on too many different surfaces. I explored different ways to paint animals in the naive style versus more anatomically correct, for example. And I just kept on having ideas. I kept exploring them all, but it never ended. And I didn't like anything I made anyway. So this was just ongoing, Kathy, and it was a nightmare. I don't know if I should say that, actually.
Yes, it sounds like it, and it's it's kind of, I need to think very hard now how I get to terms with this, because I keep telling my students, you need to experiment. It's so important. Please start trying out things. Be open. And now you tell me, but there is a situation where you you keep experimenting and it isn't getting you anywhere. And
yeah, because you can get stuck in it, because it's really exciting in a way, because you're creating ideas through this experimental process, and you're thinking, well, that's a great idea. I want to take that and I want to use it, and I could do this with it and that with it. And of course it feels really good, but it's a cycle you can get addicted to. And you're making work and you're kind of learning, and so you feel that this is okay, and that can go on too long, because eventually you've got to get focused, stop making work that just stays in the studio, and you've got to engage more beyond the studio. And you can't do that if you're always experimenting, because then you're always opening up more and more material. And you've got to stop that at some point and have a clear direction. I could talk more about that, but I know there's some more questions coming.
Yes, so what you experienced was something like getting lost in the experiments, and you never arrived at a point that felt good or finished, if I get that right. Yeah?
Yeah, that's right. It is fun, and it's an easy way to stay locked in your own head and in your own studio, because all the time you're not showing your work and getting focused and going out there. You're just you in your studio, having experimenting, trying out new ideas, and going down a rabbit hole, possibly, if it goes on too long. But I mean, it can be addictive, I think, because I remember looking at the work, for example, I could see things in it that represented lost, forgotten memories or interests I'd forgotten about, and suddenly they were in front of me. And it's not as if I was thinking consciously about it at the time. But also, experimenting is really good for the mind, because it's free to explore, and you're finding out about yourself, and you're learning about yourself, and you're also learning about the materials, of course. But it has got to come to an end at some point. That's something I had to transition. I had to transition from that into actually saying, okay, I'm going to be this kind of artist, I'm going to make this kind of work, and it's going to be seen outside of my studio. But I just want to add to that experimenting is a way to free up your mind, of course, and that's why it's so important to do.
So, listening to you, what I hear is that at some point you have to make decisions about what is really important for you, about what you want to say, what you want to pursue. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I did need to make choices, and that's something I wasn't very good at all, because every time I made a choice or a decision, and I was going in a particular direction, I think those negative voices in my head, we all have them, would say, hang on, are you sure you're going down the right avenue? Because you could do this, or you could do something else. And it didn't matter what I chose, it was always this voice saying, hang on, is that the right thing to do? And I think that's all to do with you not trusting yourself, and it's fear. And this is really well known and a common story. But I did need to make choices, you're right, but I just wasn't comfortable with any choice I took. It was mad.
I think most of us can absolutely relate to that experience. I think it's especially typical for situations when you feel under pressure for some reason. You want to do the best. You want to do something really good, and you pressure yourself so much. Or at least that's what happens to me, And then I'm unable to decide on what to do, and then you get kind of hung up. So that would mean that in such a situation, the experiment stops, or is not about finding out things anymore, but it becomes maybe some relative of procrastination.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I'm very interested in those negative voices. I think we all hear them, and they are one of the major obstacles that keep us from being happy and doing good work.
Yeah.
So what did you do? How did you break this circle? How did you get out of this?
Well, I think, we all have these voices, and you don't know what's really going on because you get so used to hearing them. They're not so easy to identify. You can't always identify these voices which you've got used to hearing. You just think it's normal. But for me, I started to feel so awful. It's like I started to kind of collapse under all the nonsense you're thinking. And I knew that something was really wrong. And I had people to talk to, and people did point out to me things like, well, perhaps you're unconsciously hiding away. Perhaps you don't believe in yourself as a painter, or you're too afraid to finally do what you're good at because you're just fearing it for some reason. And I could never relate to anything that was said to me like that, because I was thinking, well, surely if I just work harder, I'll get better. And that's the moment when I will want to put down experimenting, and I'll know when it happens because it'll be in front of me. So it was very hard. I was getting good advice, like, you need to think and realize that you're a good painter, and you need to make choices, and you just need to go with it. And I just found that very hard initially to go with, because it's new advice, isn't it? And we don't always take good advice when we first hear it. We have to learn the hard way, don't we? So it took a while, but it was a sense of something's really wrong here, and yes, there's some good advice over here, so I will listen, and I will really work hard at listening.
I think that's one of the big basic human problems. Well, I think that's part of the human condition, and that's so hard to accept. No, that everybody has to make their own experience. Even if somebody else gives you advice, or you give somebody advice, they still have to find out for themselves, right?
Yeah, always. You see this every day, and I just wish sometimes you could say to people, look, I know this is going to be really helpful, so just get with it and take the advice. But we never do, and I think I was particularly a little bit slow at picking up on good advice because I didn't trust. You don't always trust people. You've got to trust people and learn that when they give you good advice, they mean well and it works out well. And I think I perhaps didn't realise that, for example, my tutors were giving me good advice. I didn't trust them enough just to go along with them. And so trust can be an issue there. You've got to sort of learn that mostly people want to help, and definitely tutors want to help. I mean, that's why they're there in the first place. And they've got a lot of experience to offer you. And I would say to students, be open to listening, even if it feels uncomfortable, because that's probably the time when you really need to listen. And absolutely listen. Openly.
So your advice for younger artists, for students, would that also be find someone whose advice you can trust?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And this isn't, you can't always recognize immediately who you can trust if you haven't learned to do that already. But I think if you're open and you know you're in a safe place like university, there's going to be loads of people there who want to help you. I can kind of go with your heart, really. Trust people. I think you can tell who the good people are, who you can go to and keep asking questions if you need to. Yeah, I think it's a difficult one to answer, that, but it takes time to learn to trust people.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is very interesting because of course there's a lot of research has been done about the fact how fear blocks creativity in many ways. Because when you're afraid, you're tense. When you're afraid of making mistakes, you cannot experiment. But this is very interesting that when you're afraid to trust people, you cannot learn from them either.
That's right. You can't.
Very interesting.
You have to learn from people because you're always interacting with them anyway. So you can't learn anything unless you have someone or something to interact with. So and fear definitely gets in the way of people making choices, making decisions, and being creative. So that's why experimenting can be really good, because it helps free up the mind from staying with the things you know, and it takes you into an area you don't know, and or helps you to connect with the unknown, if you like, or your unconscious mind, or when you're just relaxed, you're more likely to, as you say, learn more quickly. Your mind's open. So that's another good reason for experimenting, to help with the fear.
Yeah. It's so. I mean, you're confirming one of my biggest suspicions about crisis in creativity, that it is so often connected to pressure and fear. And in order to be creative, it is so important that we learn to identify what is stressing us out and what is scaring us. And then we're already one big step further. So it's really, I know that's a hard part of the work, but it really helps to to look at what is holding us back. And
absolutely. And I would say, really, really, if you're not feeling good, you're feeling afraid to say something or do something, you've got to really work at asking yourself, why do I feel this way? What's really going on here? Why am I feeling so afraid? Why do I feel so insecure or uncomfortable? Ask yourself again and again, and mine your brain for these answers. Because
and of course this is often connected to experiences in the past, to moments where we have felt discouraged and diminished and humiliated, often connected to family, but can also be connected to bad experiences in school or with friends. And sometimes we also really need to remember that stuff to get rid of it.
Absolutely. These things, these negative experiences and comments that can be made quite, flippantly from everyone around you, whether they're people who love you or not. Anything negative can have a really big impact on you. So it's good to go back in memory in your mind and just try and figure out why you're thinking and feeling a particular way, and try and shrug off everything that people have given to you and find the real you.
Yeah. So Lizzie, what would your advice be for a younger colleague? What would you tell a younger struggling artist or somebody who is trying to, work creatively? What would you tell them?
I would say, if you're having some issues around being stuck with your work, or feeling stuck and not knowing what direction to take, if this goes on for too long, you've got to force yourself to make a move of some sort. It's better to do something than nothing and just stay stuck. Don't stay stuck in your head with that conversation, asking yourself, what am I doing, or what should I do? Get out of that thought mode and do something, anything, even if it's writing notes about your work and detailing how you've made something and why you like it and why it's successful. So get writing about all the good stuff that you're doing and observe your work and put this in your notes. It's better to do that than just to sort of stay stuck. So my advice is do something. Trust yourself. Absolutely trust yourself to get it right, and go ahead and do that thing you're afraid to do, because believe me, you'll be able to do it. That's my advice.
Wonderful. So identify what you're afraid of. I think that's an important step too, and then go for it and try to do it anyway.
Absolutely. Beat it.
Yeah, wonderful. I think that is excellent advice. Hard to do, but it will definitely take you places. I think that's, it's like gold. This advice is gold. Like, at some point you just have to make decisions.
Yeah, definitely.
At some point you have to produce something and just stand next to it and say, this is my work.
That's right. This is your work today, and when you make a piece tomorrow, that's when the work will be perhaps slightly different. It'll be your work that day, and the next day it might be slightly different, but stand by your work each day. I like that, Kathy. This
wonderful,
is who I am.
Wonderful.
This is what I've done.
Yes, and that is how you broke that cycle. So thank you so much. Thank you for being so open. Thank you for talking about creative crisis in your work and how you overcome it. And thank you for giving encouragement to all my listeners and all my students. Thanks for being my guest today.
Thanks, Kathy. It's been a pleasure.
The Artist's Toolkit. Conceptualized and presented by Kata Wenzel. Assistance, Nadia Driller. A project by European University Flensburg.